Stanley Everly never imagined his life would spiral into a full-blown soap opera just because he tried to avenge his best friend. Was this karma for being a lifelong drama magnet? Maybe. All he knew was, right now, he was going to cry, scream, and break every emotional filter he'd spent years pretending to have. How the hell are you even a doctor? Were you trained on a battlefield? Stanley shrieked, clutching his bandaged leg like he was auditioning for a medical drama. I swear I saw my entire life flash before my eyes. I thought I'd lose my leg. Not just, feel a little sting. He hugged his leg tighter, even though it clearly hurt, eyes blazing with the fury of a betrayed diva. Across the room, the man responsible for his near-death experience sat down coolly on his desk, legs crossed like he owned the entire hospital. And maybe, he did. Dr. Caleb Frosthart, 6'2" of pure, cold indifference, wrapped in black jeans and a dark button-down shirt with his lab coat casually draped on top, sleeves rolled up like a sinful afterthought. His silver hair shimmered like moonlight, perfectly tousled. Those sharp, glacier blue eyes could drown you and then freeze your corpse. A voice deep enough to stir ancient emotions, with a hint of teasing that only made it worse. He smirked, and just like that, he looked less like a doctor and more like a fantasy prince cursed to live in the modern world and ruin lives professionally. Stanley stared, despite himself. The long lashes, the broad shoulders, the god-tier cheekbones, the way his stethoscope hung around his neck like a royal badge of arrogance. If he didn't have the emotional range of a brick and the compassion of a robot, Stanley might have happily thrown himself into his arms and never left. Instead, he sniffled dramatically and yelled again, "Your license should be burned." Dr. Caleb Frosthart's lips curled into the tiniest smirk as he watched Stanley grit his teeth in frustration. The pink-haired tornado looked one breakdown away from throwing a stiletto at his head. "You clearly don't know how to treat a woman right. What kind of man are you? A walking red flag with a medical degree?" Stanley snapped, rising to his feet with the elegance of a fashion show diva, despite the obvious pain shooting through his leg. He dramatically dusted off his expensive dress and flipped his long, silky pink hair over his shoulder like a royal insult. Caleb, utterly unbothered, leaned back, voice dry and cool. "Well, you were the one flailing around like a fish out of water. If you'd just stayed still like I advised, it wouldn't have hurt nearly as much." Stanley inhaled sharply like he was about to unleash hell's dictionary of swear words. But then he paused. "No," he reminded himself. "Mission first. Cursing this annoying, sexy-faced ice block can wait. HMPH. Forget it," Stanley huffed, tossing his head to the side. "I've got better things to do. I'll deal with you later, if I ever bother coming back." With that, he plopped down on the floor, not at all graceful this time, and started strapping on his dazzling high heels. The moment they were on, he stood up tall, looking smug and slightly taller than his real 5 feet 10 inches self. He glared one last time at Drive Frosthart, who now rested his elbow on the armrest, fingers supporting his chin, looking like he was literally posing for a luxury medical magazine shoot. Stanley didn't say another word. He turned on his heels and limped dramatically out the door, hips swaying, hair bouncing, pride intact, even if his leg was screaming internally. Moments later, a nurse entered the room, just as Stanley vanished around the corner like a sparkly pink storm. "Doctor, that lady," the nurse blinked, watching the door. "She sure has a temper." Caleb didn't reply. His expression remained unreadable, though the tiniest glint of curiosity flickered in his eyes. "You treated her so gently too, and she didn't even say thank you," the nurse sighed, still no response. Instead, Caleb's gaze slowly drifted to the window of his office, which overlooked the staff parking lot. It was mostly empty at this hour except for one very suspicious figure. His brows lifted slightly. Standing in the corner, glancing around nervously to make sure no one was looking, was her. Only, not exactly. Caleb's eyes narrowed as he watched Stanley yank off his wig, revealing a mess of dark roots. Off came the padded hips, the accessories, the corset straps, like a magician shedding illusions. And then, there he was. Not a lady, not a patient, a man. One hell of a confusing, bold, dramatic man who had just declared war inside his ER in heels and glitter. Caleb blinked once, then again. "What the hell," he muttered under his breath, the smirk long gone, replaced by something new. A very rare expression for the good doctor. Genuine confusion, and maybe, just maybe, intrigued amusement. Meanwhile, Stanley looked around cautiously, making sure no one was nearby. The coast seemed clear. He groaned as he sat on the pavement behind the parking lot, rubbing his aching leg. Damn, this hurts like hell, but mission accomplished, he muttered, wincing. Now I just need to get the hell out of here before anyone recognizes me. Without wasting time, he peeled off his fitted dress and shoved it into his oversized bag, followed by his pink wig and accessories. Underneath, he'd cleverly worn a hair cover that made him look almost bald. Smart, fast, and ready for round two. He slipped on a completely new outfit. A soft yellow dress, a pastel blonde wig, changed his eye contacts from honey brown to green, added a touch of makeup, and finished with a quick spray of sweet floral perfume. With one final check in his compact mirror and a flirtatious pout at his own reflection, Stanley blew a kiss to the air. A completely different woman stood where the last one vanished. Confidently, he walked down the lot, cool, collected, and absolutely unbothered, passing the very men who had been chasing him earlier. They eyed him briefly, not with suspicion, but with admiration. Just another pretty girl out enjoying her day. They hurried off, still searching for Stanley Everly, the brat who dared mess with their boss. As soon as they disappeared around the corner, Stanley peeked out from behind a pillar, grinning from ear to ear. He flipped his hair dramatically like a queen in a late-night soap opera. Ha, they think catching Stanley Everly is child's play. The whole world chases me, and yet here I stand. Flawless, uncaught, undefeated. He planted his hands on his hips, tossed his head back, and laughed like a cartoon villain. Mwahahaha, no one can catch me, no one ever will. Right then, a quiet snicker cut through the silence like a blade. Stanley froze. His smile faltered. His spine straightened in terror. Slowly, he turned his head, and nearly choked on his own breath. Standing a few feet away, arms tucked casually into his coat pockets, leaning slightly against the wall with an infuriatingly knowing smirk, was none other than Drive. Caleb Frosthart, the Ice Prince, the Demon, the man he was trying to never see again. What the hell? Stanley yelped, stumbling back a little, heart skipping 10 beats in panic. That was quite the performance, Caleb said coolly, one brow lifting ever so slightly. His voice was laced with dry amusement, like he'd just discovered the world's most scandalous secret and was savoring every moment. I must say, the laugh was impressive. 10 out of 10 for drama. 9 for costume change, 2 for escaping like an actual ninja. -10 for thinking no one would look out the window. Stanley stared at him, stunned, his lips twitching somewhere between a scream and a sob. Oh my God, he whispered. Why are you built like a CCTV? Caleb smirked wider, his eyes gleaming. I'm a doctor, Stanley. I observe. Stanley panicked like a drenched kitten caught red-handed. He quickly looked around to make sure no one was nearby, then stormed up to the doctor, furious, flustered, and fabulous. In one swift move, he grabbed Caleb by the coat and pinned him against the nearest tree, hands slapped over his mouth, eyes wide and burning. Listen, Mr. Doctor, he hissed, lips inches away from Caleb's ear. I don't know how much you saw, or think you saw, but don't you dare tell anyone about it. Or I'll kill you. His honey brown eyes blazed, but Caleb didn't even flinch. In fact, he seemed oddly calm. Still pressed against the tree, Caleb silently pointed at his own mouth. Stanley blinked. Oh, right. He dropped his hand, huffing. Caleb's voice was cool, calm, and so silky it felt threatening without even trying. Relax. I'm not telling anyone. I'm just curious. Stanley narrowed his eyes. Curious about what? Caleb looked directly at him, gaze unwavering. You're a guy. The way he said it, without judgment, mockery, or surprise, threw Stanley off more than the question itself. There was no teasing, no smugness, just pure curiosity. It wasn't offensive. It was disarming. Stanley's shoulders relaxed for half a second, but his arms crossed quickly in defense. Yeah, I am. So what? Caleb didn't answer. His lips twitched ever so slightly, like he was fighting back a smile. Stanley squinted at him. What's that face supposed to mean? Before he could finish, his phone rang. Startled, he stumbled through his chaotic bag of clothes, wigs, and makeup, muttering curses under his breath. Caleb watched as Stanley finally pulled out the device. The screen lit up. Bestie calling. Stanley answered with a cheerful wickedness. Yup, I sent the recording to his soon-to-be wife. And for the cherry on top, I busted his car window. Twice. He let out a devilish laugh like he'd just dropped a villain monologue. What? No, they can't recognize me. I changed again, I'm in my third look of the day. Stanley adjusted his bag, turned slightly, and met Caleb's eyes for a brief moment. Then, without a single word, he turned on his heels and strutted away, as if Caleb was just a tree he had leaned on for dramatic effect. Caleb blinked, watching the whirlwind vanish down the path. Then, he let out a soft snicker. Just like a cat, he muttered to himself. Causes chaos, pins you down, makes death threats and then walks away like you don't exist. As he turned to leave, something on the ground caught his eye. He bent down and picked up a small pink earring, one of the ones Stanley had worn during his first disguise. It must have fallen out when he was digging through his bag. Caleb held it between his fingers, twirling it once before tucking it into his coat pocket. His eyes glinted with quiet amusement. How interesting. The classroom buzzed with excitement and whispers. Gossip traveled like wildfire as students eagerly discussed the unexpected news. A special guest was visiting their college today. Not just any guest, but a renowned doctor rumored to be the best in the country. No one could believe their small, chaotic college somehow had connections to someone so prestigious. Students were squealing, adjusting their hair, checking mirrors, and panicking over what to wear for just a lecture. Meanwhile, Stanley was busy beating up his best friend. "You don't understand," he shouted, pulling Andy into a dramatic headlock. "That piece of crap, how is he even a human being? Just let this class end and I swear to God I'm going to end him." Andy sat there sighing, completely unfazed, sipping his iced coffee with one eye open like he'd lived through this too many times. "You know what, just forget it," Andy muttered. "Yesterday was enough. His fiancée kicked him out. His dad cut off his credit cards. You totaled his car. I think the universe has served him enough punishment." The situation was dramatic enough for a whole soap opera season. Andy's ex-boyfriend, aka the most toxic, possessive man on earth, had been double-timing. Living with his rich fiancée and sneaking around with Andy on the side. Andy wanted to break up peacefully. Stanley wanted to set things on fire. And so, Stanley did what he does best, cause chaos in designer heels. Disguised as a gorgeous, mysterious woman, Stanley went on a date with the sleazebag, made him drunk, tricked him into spilling all his dirty secrets, recorded everything, and sent it straight to the fiancé and the rich daddy. Bonus: he smashed the guy's car for good measure. That would have been the end of it, if only Stanley hadn't injured his leg trying to escape the guy's men who were out hunting him down. Which led him to the nearest luxury hospital where he, tragically, met Dr. Iceblock Caleb Frosthart. It had been a week since then, and Stanley thought it was all over. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The ex was back again. Now bothering Andy through social media. Again. Stanley slammed his hands on the desk, eyes glowing with vengeance. "I swear to every skincare product I own, let this class end. I'm going to break his spine. Emotionally and physically." Andy just blinked. "You've already emotionally ruined him. I need consistency. You scare me." Good. The class fell into silence as their professor finally walked in. But what truly sent a ripple through the room, causing gasps, wide eyes, and even a few dropped pens, was the man who entered right behind him. Long legs clad in crisp white jeans, a tailored suit jacket hugging broad shoulders, and silver hair styled perfectly to the side, exposing just half of his forehead like a royal tease. His sharp jawline looked like it could slice egos. A subtle scent of cedar drifted through the room as he walked in, followed by an overwhelming aura of dominance and composure that seemed to push the air itself aside. Every head turned, every breath caught. Stanley, who'd been casually leaning back and scrolling through his phone, froze mid-scroll. His eyes widened. His soul momentarily left his body. No freaking way. It was Dr. Caleb Frosthart, looking like he just walked out of a luxury fashion magazine's fantasy issue. Hot doctors who ruin your life with just one look. The girls gawked. Some guys literally covered their mouths. Even the class topper whispered a curse under her breath. Stanley stared, until his brain caught up, and immediately ducked his head behind his desk like a guilty cat caught on the kitchen counter. Next to him, Andy nudged him hard, eyes wide with thirst. "Holy crap. He's so damn good looking. OMG, who is that man? A god, a walking perfume ad, Stanley gritted his teeth, whispering through clenched jaws. That's him. Andy blinked. Him who? The doctor. The annoying, ice-cold, smug-faced, too handsome for his own good Caleb Frosthart. Andy's eyes grew so big they almost popped out of his head. No freaking. That's the guy. Men, we're dead. But Stanley didn't respond. He stayed frozen, trying to disappear into the floor. Because unfortunately, Caleb had already seen him. The moment he stepped into the room, Caleb's gaze had flicked over the crowd with practiced ease, until it landed on him. The corner of Caleb's lips twitched, ever so slightly. He schooled his expression, remaining calm, but his eyes didn't lie. There you are, his gaze seemed to say. There was no mistaking that posture. That pout. Those impossibly expressive honeyed eyes that had widened in horror the second their gazes met. So they're real, Caleb thought. Not contacts after all. Stanley was now at his real form as Guy, and he looked prettier than Caleb could ever imagine. He'd spent the entire week trying to shake off the strange chaos that was Stanley Everly. But now, fate had flung him right back into it, with full academic lighting and front row seating. Caleb took his seat near the front, arms folded calmly, while inside he was already plotting. The session began. Dr. Caleb Frosthart stood poised in front of the classroom, radiating calm professionalism. His words were precise, his posture confident, and that small, polite smile never left his face as he covered various important medical topics. Every student was hanging on to his words, except one. Stanley. Stanley felt like those silver eyes were undressing him. Not literally, but worse, teasing him, testing him, targeting him. Every few seconds, Caleb's gaze would sweep the class, but it always lingered a little too long on him. Stanley felt like a bug under a microscope. He hated it, so he did what he did best. Silently, he opened his favorite little bag, his secret arsenal. Inside was everything from gum to lip gloss to random glitter to a shiny red apple. He smirked. Then he bit into it. Crunch. The loud sound echoed through the dead silent classroom, jerking everyone's attention. Every head turned. There was Stanley, sitting like a prince of chaos, casually leaning back with one leg crossed over the other, munching his apple like he was watching a boring Netflix drama. That smug expression on his face screamed, "Try me." The class burst into hushed laughter. Everyone knew Stanley. He was the infamous campus troublemaker, the rebel with too much eyeliner and too little fear. Caleb paused mid-sentence, clearly taken off guard. For a second, a genuine smile twitched at the corner of his lips. This guy was really something. But Caleb didn't say a word. He only looked. And Stanley hated how it felt like he was the one getting undressed now. After the class ended, Stanley was the first to bolt out of the room. While the rest stayed back to ask Caleb questions, some even trying to sneak a picture, despite Caleb's strict no-photo rule, the doctor's eyes subtly followed the retreating figure holding his tiny, glittery bag like a lifeline. Stanley, on a mission, rushed straight to the bathroom. He locked the stall, pulled out a simple sky blue dress, threw on a braid wig, and did a quick makeup touch-up with the precision of a spy preparing for infiltration. He wasn't doing this just for fun today. This was war. Target. Berg, the jerk ex who broke Andy's heart. With his look in place, Stanley headed to Berg's classroom. As expected, Berg sat with his gang, laughing like a spoiled prince who owned the school. Stanley rolled his eyes and strutted in coolly, hips swaying and lips curled in a smug smirk. No one recognized him. Perfect. Instead of approaching Berg directly, he sauntered over to a quiet student sitting in the corner and leaned in as if to flirt. In reality, he slipped the boy a USB, whispering, "Do it." As we planned. The boy, Bobby, nodded, eyes gleaming under his hoodie. Within seconds, the damning footage was uploaded and sent, anonymously, to the principal's inbox. The clip: Berg cheating on projects, bullying students, forcing others to write reports for him. It was brutal. Justice in 4K. Not even 2 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. Berg raced to the principal's office. Now, Stanley and Bobby high-fived discreetly. Mission slayed. Stanley skipped off like a victorious villain back to the boys' bathroom. Making sure it was empty, he exhaled dramatically, rubbing off his makeup with a wipe, yanked off the wig, ruffled his short hair, and groaned, "God, bras are such a scam." Dressing as a girl was both a hobby and a weapon. No one knew about it, except Andy. And well, he didn't have much of a family left to tell anyway. His father had passed early. His mother, on the other hand, had thrown him out at 16 the moment she discovered his secret. Since then, Stanley had survived on scraps and part-time gigs, most of which he only landed by dressing as a girl. Sketchy jobs, sure, but survival doesn't ask for morals. Andy, who had his own struggles, he was kicked out by his parents after coming out. He had found him at his lowest, drenched in rain, heels broken, mascara smudged, standing in front of a half-eaten burger in a cafe window. Since then, they became each other's family. They shared rent, shared pain, shared secrets, and now, Stanley was going to ruin anyone who dared to hurt Andy. And Berg just took the first hit. Stanley's thoughts stopped as he froze midway through pulling off his dress when footsteps echoed outside the bathroom. His heart skipped. Someone was coming. Stanley barely had time to react before the door creaked open, and there stood Caleb, calm, composed, and utterly infuriating. Stanley's eyes shot wide open, locking with the dark eyes behind Caleb's glasses. "Oh my God, why is it you again?" Stanley hissed, equal parts mad and exasperated. Caleb's face, which had been almost expressionless moments before, suddenly lit up. His lips curled into a slow, amused smile as he stepped inside and casually leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Well, we meet again," Caleb said, his voice carrying a teasing edge with zero effort to hide his amusement. "You," Stanley started, mouth ready to unleash 1,000 curses, but then he caught Caleb's eyes drifting downward. His gaze landed on Stanley's exposed waist, pale, slim, the skin smooth except for a small, distinct mole just a bit off from his belly button. Stanley's breath caught. He could feel Caleb's eyes undressing him like a book. Caleb's fingers tapped his chin thoughtfully, as if savoring a delicious secret. "That little mole on your waist. It makes you unfairly cute." He lifted his eyes back to meet Stanley's, smirking. "Now I'm curious, how many more adorable secrets are you hiding on that body?" Stanley's eyes went wide with shock and anger. He yanked his dress back down, glaring daggers. "You, how dare you mess with me, huh? You clearly don't know who you're dealing with. I'm kind of famous for breaking noses before even talking." He stepped closer, voice dropping low and dangerous. "You're lucky you're a respected doctor, or that annoyingly handsome face of yours would have met my fist by now. Keep pushing, though, and I swear I won't hold back next time." Caleb blinked, then grinned like he'd just heard exactly what he wanted. "Ah," he said, mock seriously. "So you do think I'm handsome? I've been waiting for that confession." Stanley's jaw nearly dropped in disbelief. "Seriously, that's what you care about?" He opened his mouth, ready to snap again, when voices approached from outside. Stanley froze. Panic crept in, his hands trembling. "My secret, what if it's about to be revealed?" Caleb noticed immediately. Calm and quick as ever, he grabbed Stanley's wrist and, with the other hand, snatched his bag. Before Stanley could protest, Caleb yanked him toward the nearest toilet stall and slammed the door shut behind them. "What the hell are you doing?" Stanley hissed, still mad but swallowing his words as the voices grew louder outside. A group of boys entered the bathroom, laughing and talking loudly, completely unaware of the two locked inside. Stanley bit his lip, heart pounding, as Caleb quietly closed the gap between them and whispered, "Relax, no one's going to find out. Not today." Inside the tight stall, the silence grew heavier than the space between them. Stanley was practically pressed up against Caleb's chest, fuming, flustered, and dangerously close to short-circuiting. Caleb's arms around his waist, holding him in place. The close quarters forced their bodies almost pressed together, each feeling the other's hot breath in the stale bathroom air. His dress was still half clutched in place, but that wasn't the problem anymore. The real problem was the way Caleb was staring at him, not smug this time but curious. Intently, as if Stanley was a fascinating case study with a wildly beautiful twist. "You're too close," Stanley hissed, voice low, eyes darting around like a cornered cat. "Don't you have some surgery to perform or a textbook to chew on or something?" Caleb leaned in slightly, enough that Stanley could smell the faint hint of hospital soap and peppermint gum. "I do," he replied calmly. "But you, Mr. Everly, are far more interesting than a bypass procedure." Stanley's eye twitched. "I swear to God if you don't stop talking like a flirty villain, I will break my nose." "Yes, I remember," Caleb cut in with a little amused breath. "Though statistically speaking, You'd be more effective throwing something. Those wrists aren't exactly built for uppercuts. Stanley gasped. Excuse me, are you wrist-shaming me right now? Merely observing. Caleb's lips curled just a bit. But those hands are very pretty. Stanley, scandalized, slapped a hand over Caleb's mouth. Stop talking or I will turn this into a murder scene. Caleb blinked slowly, then licked Stanley's palm. Stanley let out a scream so high-pitched it could summon bats. You pervert, were you born without shame? I'm a doctor, Caleb said casually, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I've seen worse. You haven't seen me worse, Stanley snapped. And you won't. This right here, this hideous accidental scenario, never happened. Do you hear me? Caleb leaned closer again, eyes narrowing in that knowing, gleaming way. Oh, I'll remember it forever. Stanley frowned and stayed silent, deliberately avoiding Caleb's gaze. He fixed his eyes elsewhere, feeling unbearably uneasy in the cramped stall with Caleb's arms still resting firm on his waist. Caleb, however, was completely amused. He held Stanley's eyes, trying to peer deeper into them, but Stanley kept looking away, stubborn and uncomfortable. Instead, Caleb's attention shifted. He found himself admiring Stanley's flawless, soft skin. His round cheeks, the delicate arch of his eyebrows, soft yet sharp like a wary kitten. His lips were thin but naturally red, his black hair glossy and soft, releasing a faint, intoxicating scent. Caleb swallowed hard when his gaze drifted to Stanley's ear, noticing two tiny moles on the earlobe, which was slightly flushed and warm. What the hell do you think you're doing? Stanley snapped, catching Caleb's lingering stare. Caleb blinked, then spoke before he could stop himself, his voice softer than intended. You're really pretty. He immediately regretted it, normally so controlled. His words, his expression, he was suddenly unfiltered around Stanley, completely disarmed. Stanley froze, stunned by the unexpected praise. What are you saying? I'm not even wearing a wig now. His voice dropped as he looked away, cheeks heating up. Caleb's eyes softened. I know. That's why I said it. Stanley's cheeks flushed even deeper. You look prettier this way. Stanley was speechless. Somehow, no sharp retort came to mind. Shut up, he finally stammered, pushing Caleb away and creating some much-needed distance. Before Stanley could combust into actual flames, the bathroom door opened again and the boys outside finally left, their laughter fading. Stanley let out a breath, slumping against the stall wall. Thank God. Want me to escort you out in case someone's still around? Caleb offered, suddenly all polite and soft like a damn angel with devil horns hiding behind his ears. Stanley glared, tugging the strap of his bag back on and hissing, no thanks, drive. Pervert, I can handle my own scandal. He opened the door and marched out, only to slip slightly in his heels, nearly toppling over. Caleb caught him effortlessly, arm looping around Stanley's waist with infuriating grace. Stanley froze, again, because that same stupid doctor was smirking down at him like he already knew every secret he hadn't said. You sure? Caleb murmured, because I think you're trouble. And I like trouble. Stanley pushed away, cheeks red as tomatoes. You need therapy. Caleb chuckled. I am therapy. Stanley rolled eyes, fanning his flushed cheeks with trembling hands. Caleb only smiled amused watching him. In his hands was Stanley's backpack, overstuffed and betraying its owner. The zipper gave a dramatic, long pop before, thud, clank, clatter, plop. One after another, Stanley's crime bag betrayed him, spilling onto the bathroom floor in glorious chaos. A full-sized metal water bottle rolled dramatically across the tiles, hitting the door with a loud echo. Two wigs, one pink, one silver with a braid, landed like fallen soldiers. A tiny makeup box burst open with a proud sparkle. A half-eaten apple, the very one Stanley had munched on in class, bounced once and settled. A packet of dried mangoes, a tiny plush bunny keychain, and somehow, a mini hair straightener joined the pile. Even a random Uno card, a dreaded draw 4, floated down like fate's final joke. Caleb blinked, twice. Then slowly, his eyes locked onto Stanley's. Stanley was frozen, his soul apparently waving goodbye as embarrassment washed over him. He stared at the floor, then at Caleb, then back at the half-eaten apple, and finally up to the ceiling, silently begging the universe for a reset. Caleb couldn't hold it any longer. A soft, genuine laugh escaped him, calm, soothing, but utterly real. Stanley's cheeks flared redder, and he sulked, puffing out his cheeks like a disgruntled child. "Shut up," he muttered. Caleb stopped teasing him, his smile softening. Kneeling down, he carefully gathered every fallen item and gently packed them back into Stanley's rebellious backpack. "Okay, I won't tease you anymore. Don't be mad," Caleb said, zipping the bag closed and holding it out to Stanley. Stanley shot him a sharp glare but snatched the bag quickly, hugging it like a lifeline. He was about to rush out, then remembered, he was still in a dress. There was no way he could just walk out like this. He looked at Caleb, unsure how to ask for help, pride bruised and embarrassment bubbling up. Caleb didn't wait for words. He stepped closer, closing the bathroom door behind him and leaning against it like a silent guard. "You can change," he said softly, his voice gentle, as if he understood everything without needing to be told. Stanley's heart skipped an awkward, stupid beat, but he kept his cool. Hurrying into a stall, he stripped off the dress and slipped back into his usual clothes, simple black jeans, a white tee, and a shirt tossed over. He slung the bag over one shoulder, splashed water on his face again just to make sure every trace of makeup was gone, then ruffled his hair in frustration. "What?" Stanley demanded, pulling up his shirt sleeves and glaring at Caleb, who was watching him like a man fascinated by a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. "You're very good looking," Caleb said, matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural compliment in the world. Stanley's cheeks flared bright red. "Shut up, dude." He turned on his heel, ready to leave. "You're annoying, but whatever." "Thanks," Stanley muttered and broke into a quick, almost kitten-like sprint. But Caleb called out before he could get far. "Isn't this yours?" Caleb held up a small earring that jingled gently in his fingers. Stanley's eyes widened. He recognized it immediately, the one he'd lost without even realizing it. "I figured it was yours and thought I should return it to its rightful owner," Caleb said, his voice soft and sincere. "I thought about keeping it but then I realized I couldn't, not without your consent." That smile, warm and genuine, hit Stanley in a way he didn't want to analyze. Without thinking, he snatched the earring and stuffed it into his bag before bolting away like a bullet. Caleb stood there, watching Stanley's retreating back. He couldn't shake the image of how good Stanley looked, not just in a dress, but in his usual guy clothes too. Honestly, Stanley looked incredible either way, and somehow, that fact made Caleb's heart flutter in ways he couldn't explain. As a doctor, he'd never understood how a heart could behave like this. He'd always thought it was just fantasy, something from novels or daydreams. But now, standing alone in that quiet bathroom, Caleb knew it was real. And his mind was already replaying the image of that pretty face that had just run away. Stanley slammed his dorm room door shut behind him, then leaned against it, taking deep breaths in and out like he'd just run a marathon. Andy, sprawled on the couch with a game controller in one hand and a bag of chips in the other, glanced up without missing a beat. "Oh, you're back. What happened?" Stanley threw his bag on the bed and flopped down like he'd been hit by a truck. "Oh God, this doctor. He's after me," he growled. Andy raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Wow, but he's so freaking good looking. Seems like a total gentleman, and, you know, totally your type." "What's the deal?" Stanley snatched the chips from Andy's hands and stuffed a handful into his mouth, glaring fiercely. "No, he's not my type. I mean, yeah, he's good looking and all, but he's so annoying." Andy grinned, clearly entertained. "What did he even do?" Stanley opened his mouth to launch into a rant but paused. Nothing bad came to mind. Because honestly, that doctor never did anything wrong to him. That thought just made Stanley madder. "Well, he's just annoying," Stanley huffed, crossing his arms with determination. "His face alone makes me mad. I never want to see him again." But fate had other plans. The very next day, Stanley injured his other leg. How? Well, he was sitting at park, eating his favorite burger, when his custom wig slipped off the bag and landed on the floor. A stray cat, because of course, snatched it up in its mouth and started playing with it. Stanley, determined not to lose his prized wig, jumped up to grab it back. But the cat got startled, darted after him, and in the chase, Stanley tripped and bruised his leg. Hilarious, right? Caleb, treating the bleeding leg in the hospital's treatment room, had a hard time keeping a straight face. Stanley was sitting stiffly, arms crossed, cheeks puffed out in a perfect sulk, hiding how much it actually hurt, He was wearing shorts with a white t-shirt where the claw marks were still visible, still on his usual guy form, his black hair a mess. Caleb kept his smile in check, gently cleaning and bandaging the wounds. Stanley sniffed dramatically. "I can't wear skirts anymore," he muttered, rubbing his nose. Caleb smirked, sliding off his gloves with a calm, teasing tone. "Well, who told you to wrestle with a cat?" Stanley just glared, and Caleb quietly imagined the two kittens, one fuzzy and feline, the other stubbornly human, locked in a ridiculous little battle. "How long will it take to heal?" Stanley asked, his voice softer than before. Caleb sat down across from him, eyes locking with Stanley's sparkling ones. He smiled warmly as he scribbled the prescription. "1 week. Just don't let it get wet. Within 3 weeks, it'll be completely healed. You're lucky no bones broke." Stanley nodded, a cheeky grin forming. "Yeah, imagine if my bones did break. I'd have to use a wheelchair. Then I couldn't wear dresses. And who the hell would marry me then?" "I will." Caleb's voice dropped to an almost whisper, so low Stanley barely caught it. Stanley blinked, stunned, as if he thought he misheard. "Doc, did you just say something?" "Nothing," Caleb said, eyes soft and steady, holding Stanley's gaze. In those eyes, Stanley saw something honest, unguarded, a reflection of himself. Caleb's tone shifted to genuine curiosity. "Is dressing up your hobby?" For the first time, Stanley didn't feel judged. No one except Andy knew this secret, and now Caleb, who not only knew, but seemed to like him just the way he was. Stanley shrugged casually. "Maybe, yeah, kinda like a hobby. Being a girl has its perks. Honestly, I only dress up when I wanna cause trouble." He winked devilishly. Caleb chuckled softly. "Causing trouble is second nature to you, huh?" "Of course. I'm proud of that," Stanley grinned. Then, teasingly, "Also don't you think I look pretty that way?" Caleb smiled, his voice and eyes gentler than he intended. "Yes, honestly, you look gorgeous as both versions of yourself." Stanley's heart fluttered unexpectedly. He brushed a stray lock of hair off his forehead, voice dropping lower. "Then which version do you like the most?" Before Caleb could answer, his hand reached out. Stanley froze, eyes wide as Caleb gently plucked a tiny leaf from his hair. Caleb's face was so close now, his voice soft and sincere. "The one who's a mess right in front of me." Goosebumps prickled Stanley's skin. His face flushed crimson, spreading from ears to neck. He gripped his pants tightly, mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Caleb caught the fiery flush spreading across Stanley's face and chuckled softly. Leaning back in his chair, he asked out of nowhere, "So, once we start dating, should I call you my husband, or would you prefer being my lovely wife?" Silence. Stanley blinked, then jumped up, pointing a sharp finger at Caleb. "The hell are you saying? We're not even boyfriend-girlfriend yet, and you're already jumping straight to husband and wife. Are you speedrunning romance or what?" "Oh," Caleb raised an eyebrow, that subtle smirk tugging at his lips. "Then that means I can call you my boyfriend." Stanley swallowed the heat rising in his cheeks and shot back. "Hold up, who the hell said we're dating?" Caleb's smile deepened, eyes gleaming with mischief. "I said it. I can see the future, you know, and you're in it. Always causing trouble, and me. Always there, cleaning it up with a smile. Sounds perfect to me." Stanley groaned in disbelief. "You? Oh my God, how can a doctor be this crazy and shameless?" Caleb stood up quickly and gently placed a hand on Stanley's shoulder, sensing the pain beneath his bravado. "Why, aren't doctors allowed to feel things?" Stanley tried to brush it off, but when a sharp sting shot through his leg, he groaned and leaned into Caleb, gripping his shoulder. "Ah, it hurts like crap," he whispered. Caleb nodded, helping Stanley sit down carefully. "I know. That's why you need to rest. Your friend'll be here any minute. So hold tight. Don't make it worse." Stanley crossed his arms, glaring but unable to hide his racing heart or the deep red tint on his cheeks. Caleb sat down nearby, resting his chin on his fist, watching Stanley's every twitch and blush with a small, fond smile. By the time Andy arrived to support Stanley, the latter poked his tongue out at Caleb in mock annoyance before hurriedly leaving. Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. The nurse, watching all this, asked, "How are you still so calm? That was the rudest patient I've ever seen. Didn't even thank you." Caleb's voice softened, eyes sparkling like starlight as he said, "Don't you know how kittens are? Always a little trouble, never saying thank you, yet somehow, they're so adorable, you just end up loving them even more. The nurse blushed, thinking this patient must have cast some kind of love spell on their most composed doctor. She decided she definitely needed to share this juicy tea with the others. That night, Stanley sat at his desk, munching chips and staring at his injured leg, replaying the chaotic hospital encounter in his mind. His phone suddenly rang. The number was unknown. Hesitant but curious, he answered. A familiar, annoyingly charming voice purred. "Hello, my fierce patient." Stanley sat up straight, incredulous. "Ha, it's you. Where'd you get my number from?" Caleb chuckled, sitting cross-legged in his dimly lit office, fingers playing with a paperweight, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Maybe a friend of yours." Stanley blinked. "Damn you, Andy, who the hell said you can gave him my number?" he shouted. Meanwhile, Andy, who was in the bathroom, showering, was confused by his shouting, not hearing him well. "Wait a minute," Stanley said, hopping up and heading to the bathroom. He locked the door and switched off the lights. Thankfully, the switch was outside. He smirked devilishly. Andy yelled from behind the door, "Stanley, screw you. Turn the lights back on, you idiot." Caleb burst out laughing, clearly entertained. Stanley shot back, "You laugh way too much, doctor." "Exactly, it's been so long since I truly smiled. But with you, I do it all the time without even noticing," Caleb said warmly. "Huh, are you calling me a clown?" Stanley pouted. "Nope, a cat, an adorable troublemaker kitten." "Damn you," Stanley muttered, though his smile betrayed him. "So, why'd you call? What do you want?" "As your doctor, I wanted to check on your leg." "Oh, it's fine. I'm avoiding water as much as possible. But is there anything else I should avoid to heal faster? I just bought a new skirt I want to try on. It won't look good with this huge bandage," Stanley said. Caleb smiled softly. "Yes, there is. Avoid running around. No physical contact, and try not to get too close to others. Focus on healing, and especially, don't look at any other men." Stanley, nodding seriously at first, then paused. "Wait, what does that have to do with my injury? Why avoid men?" "Because you're mine." Stanley burst out laughing. "Oh my god, doctor, you're cringe as hell." "My apologies. This is my first time coaxing someone," Caleb replied gently. Stanley's smile softened, heartwarming. "Well, doctor, you need to practice more. Coaxing me isn't easy. You won't get me under your spell that fast." "That's fine. I love a challenge," Caleb said, glancing out at the moon through his window. He heard Stanley's laughter through the line and thought to himself, this is worth it. No nights felt this warm or good in a long time. A month had passed, and Stanley hardly noticed how close he'd grown to Caleb. Their sudden meetups, whether from Stanley's frequent injuries or late-night chats, felt natural, comforting. Stanley found himself sharing almost everything about his chaotic life with Caleb. Despite Caleb's busy schedule as a doctor, he never missed Stanley's calls or texts. Stanley, in turn, knew Caleb's routine well and made sure never to disturb him when he was swamped. One afternoon, Stanley was on a video call with Caleb, sitting in front of a mirror as he applied lipstick, getting ready. "Listen, I'm gonna do something super fun today," Stanley announced, speaking through the speaker as he carefully lined his lips. Caleb chuckled softly, watching him get ready. "What kind of new mess are you getting into now?" Stanley smirked, eyes sparkling with mischief. "You remember the ex of my best friend, right? The nightmare who won't quit? Well, he's still harassing Andy late at night, and not just him. He's doing the same to half the girls and guys in our class. So, it's finally time to destroy him for real." He struck a dramatic pose, finishing up his look a casual jeans and t-shirt combo, black wig, and subtle makeup. "Tonight, he's going on another date at a club, but I'm bringing all his other girls and boyfriends to confront him. And get this, his dad will be there to witness his wrath." "Perfect showtime, huh?" Stanley laughed, excitement bubbling in his voice. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a solid plan. But, why no dress today?" Stanley winked. "In case I need to run. After causing trouble, I gotta make a quick getaway." Caleb smiled, shaking his head amusedly. "Which club are you heading to?" "Oh, it's a big one. The richest man in the country owns it, the X-Velvet Club." "You know it." Caleb blinked, a bit taken aback by the name. "Stanley, darling, are you sure this plan is foolproof?" Caleb asked, concern edging his voice. Stanley nodded confidently. "Yeah, what's the worst that can happen? No one can hurt me." That's why I'm dressed as a girl. If I see red flags, I'm out of there. Alright, then, good luck. Caleb's tone was soft but firm. Stanley blew him a flying kiss. Okay, gotta go. Mission time. Bye. And with that, he cut the call and rushed out. On the other end, Caleb stayed tense, worry etched deep in his eyes. He hurried through his patience, finishing work as quickly as possible, then grabbed his car keys, ready to follow Stanley's wild escapade. The entire club, once loud and alive with booming music and flashing lights, had gone utterly silent. The crowd was now clustered in one tense group, eyes fixed on the corner where Berg stood, head down, face flushed with regret, anger, and shame. Around him were the girls and guys he had deceived, those he'd toyed with and left behind. His father, Mr. Grace, stood towering before him, his face a mask of cold fury and disappointment. The sting on Berg's cheek was fresh, the sharp imprint of his father's slap, delivered after uncovering Berg's reckless betrayal of their family's name and honor. Mr. Grace's voice was low but thunderous, laced with wounded pride. How could you disgrace me like this? Ruining everything I built for what? Your childish games. By the bar, Stanley sipped his juice, twirling a lock of his hair with a smug smile. He savored the sight of Berg's downfall. Andy, standing quietly beside him, wore a pitiful expression. Stanley, maybe we went too far. Stanley shot him a sharp look. No way, this is exactly what he deserves. Honestly, I feel bad for the girl he left pregnant. His gaze flicked toward a woman standing near Mr. Grace, the one Berg had abandoned without a second thought, refusing any responsibility. Berg treats people like chess pieces, playing, discarding, never caring. He deserved more worse. From the front, Mr. Grace muttered through gritted teeth, his face red with anger. How much more will I suffer, having a son like you? Berg's fists clenched tightly, his face turning crimson. His eyes suddenly snapped up and locked on Andy and Stanley. You, this is all because of you. Why did I even waste my time on a worthless freak like you? Berg spat at Andy, venom dripping from every word. Playing around with you wasn't even fun. I left because you were pathetic. And now you're using your little friend to ruin me. Is that it? You think you're so high and mighty? His glare shifted sharply to Stanley. Don't think I don't know it was you, Stanley. You planned all this just to screw me over because of your pathetic friend. Before Berg could finish, a fist smashed into his face. Screw you, Stanley roared, grabbing Berg's collar and launching punch after punch. You really think I'm just gonna sit here and listen to your crap about my best friend? You're nothing but a spoiled jerk. It's not just for my friend, Stanley snapped, standing tall and glaring at Berg. Don't you feel any shame, speaking like you've done nothing wrong after breaking so many hearts with that thing called love? You think love's a game? Even breaking hearts might be bad enough, but getting a poor girl pregnant and then abandoning her? No responsibility, no care. How can you even call yourself a man after that? And you still dare open your mouth? I should applaud your nerve. With that, Stanley kicked Berg hard in the stomach. Berg doubled over, gasping for air, spitting blood. Stanley turned his gaze to Mr. Grace, who looked away in shame. See, mister, this is the live broadcast of your son's disgrace. Berg wiped blood from his lips, his face twisted in fury. Damn you, Stanley, I'll ruin you. You think you can get away with this? You don't know the power I have. Someone as cheap as you doesn't even deserve to stand in a club like this. I could ban you from every place you care about. You don't know me at all. A sudden, commanding voice cut through the tension, deep, calm, but filled with undeniable authority and power. That power you speak of, it was never yours. It belonged to your father. Don't confuse inheritance with true strength. Everyone froze, eyes snapping toward the entrance. Caleb stepped in, radiating dominance that made the crowd shrink back. His dark eyes locked onto Berg's, ice cold and unforgiving. First of all, you have no power of your own. And second, this club, it's mine, so watch your mouth. I don't tolerate nobody's talking trash about someone who belongs to me on my turf. Berg, caught off guard and speechless, trembled under Caleb's glare. Get this dirt out of here, Caleb commanded sharply. Two burly guards immediately grabbed Berg, who struggled and spat threats. No, leave me, Stanley, you'll pay for this. Pay my foot, you brainless jalapeno. How are you even still talking? You useless raisin in human form, moldy rice ball, idiot sandwich, rotten egg, cursed pizza crust, toe-faced fucker bastard. Stanley unleashed a barrage of curses, a relentless stream of venomous words so sharp and profane that the crowd fell silent in stunned awe, some impressed by his mastery of insults no one had heard before. Andy sighed, knowing his best friend well. Caleb also sighed softly, massaging his forehead in amusement with a low chuckle. Mr. Grace, though ashamed, showed a flicker of respect toward Caleb, clearly aware of the real power in the room. Mr. Grace, Caleb said firmly, it's time to teach your son some manners and make him face the consequences of his mistakes. The elder man nodded solemnly, the weight of Caleb's words sinking in as he turned to leave. With his son, Stanley's eyes lingered on Caleb. Then, with a triumphant grin, he clapped and high-fived the crowd around him. The people Berg had wronged finally felt justice had been served. Stanley approached the pregnant girl, his expression softening. I really admire girls like you, so strong and fearless. I still can't believe you actually stood up for yourself by coming here. The girl, with her beautiful hair and gentle smile, nodded. Of course, if I didn't, who knows how many others would have suffered the same. The world needs to know people like him exist and that they'll be held accountable. I actually feel so much better now, proud even. Stanley chuckled softly. What about the baby, though? She smiled gently. Don't worry, the man I was arranged to marry has been so supportive. He understands everything and is ready to raise the child with me. I'm not going to abort. Stanley teased, so men like that do exist after all. She blushed, shy but sincere. He loves me deeply. For him, my happiness is all that matters. Stanley smiled, then caught Andy's eye. Andy chuckled and gave Stanley a thumbs up as he led the girl away. Stanley furrowed his brow, confused. Then he remembered. Oh right, you're here. I never imagined you were this powerful. Caleb, who had been cold and distant until now, softened into a warm, sugary smile as he looked at Stanley. You finally noticed me. Stanley raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I did. How does a doctor like you end up owning a place like this? Caleb shrugged. Honestly, my brother owns it. I just have half the shares. Still counts as mine, right? Stanley nodded, impressed. So you're a big deal. Damn, how does someone like you even notice me? Caleb smirked. So, did you run? Stanley struck a playful pose. No, but I threw hands. Pants are best when you got a fight or run. By the way, why are you here? Caleb stepped closer, his hands sliding gently around Stanley's slim waist, pulling him in. Stanley's heart raced, comforted by the touch. His own hands rested lightly on Caleb as he looked up at him. I knew you were inviting trouble, so I had to come. Remember when I said I'd clean up your mess? Caleb smiled, his fingers firm but gentle around Stanley's waist. Stanley chuckled, crossing his arms. You're taking advantage of me, doctor. Who said you could hold my waist? Caleb leaned in, voice teasing. Well, you're not backing away. Isn't that a yes? Stanley quickly pulled back, laughing. Okay, Dr. Caleb Frostart, it's time we leave. Or do you want to stay here forever? Caleb's smile deepened. I can stay anywhere as long as you're there. Damn you and your pickup lines, Stanley laughed, resting his forehead against Caleb's chest. Caleb quietly watched him laugh, as if Stanley's joy was the most precious treasure in the galaxy. The wind was cold but comfortable as Stanley and Caleb walked side by side under the starry night sky. You're richer than I thought, Stanley muttered with a smirk. Wow, I really hit the jackpot. How many brothers do you have? 3, Caleb replied easily. One's a businessman, the second's an engineer, and then there's me. Stanley whistled softly. Damn, you all are successful. Your parents must be proud. Caleb nodded. Mom, yeah, she's proud. Stanley's expression softened. He remembered hearing rumors that Caleb's father had abandoned their mother when Caleb was just a month old, leaving her to raise 3 boys alone. And yet, she never gave up working hard so all 3 sons could become successful and wealthy. Your mom is a real warrior, Stanley said sincerely, patting Caleb's shoulder as they walked. And you're no less, staying by her side and never giving up. I'm impressed. Caleb met his gaze and smiled warmly. Stanley was about to head back to his dorm when Caleb insisted, it's late. Come over to my place. Stanley's eyes widened in alarm. No way. Caleb laughed softly. Why not? After marriage, you'll be living with me anyway. So why not see the house first? Stanley sighed, calling Caleb the king of delusions, but he agreed. Caleb's smile lit up as he led the way to the parking lot. Stanley's jaw dropped. Wow, this beauty is something else. His eyes sparkled as he admired the sleek, expensive black car. Caleb chuckled and slid into the driver's seat. Stanley followed, fumbling with the seatbelt. Caleb leaned forward, his cheek almost brushing Stanley's nose as he fastened it for him. "Shall we get going?" Caleb asked softly. Stanley nodded, cheeks flushing. When they arrived, Stanley fought to contain his excitement. The mansion was sparkling under the moonlight, complete with a fountain, large garden, and a garage. "Don't be uneasy, come," Caleb said as he entered the passcode and opened the door. Stanley stepped in cautiously. "Oh, son, you're back. I thought you wouldn't come," came a familiar voice. Caleb sighed. He had forgotten his mother was coming over tonight. His mother's eyes landed on Stanley. "Wait, who did you bring?" "Huh, a girl, such a beautiful girl." She rushed towards Stanley, eyes sparkling with interest. "Oh my, you're so pretty. What's your name, dear?" Stanley blushed, wanting to disappear, but kept his cool. "Hello, Auntie. I'm Stanley. Nice to meet you. How adorable. But wait, didn't you say you liked guys? And that you already had someone you liked?" she asked, glancing at her son. Stanley stiffened, surprise and irritation flickering across his face. He bit back the urge to snap. Caleb barely said a word, gently steering his mother toward the kitchen and then leading Stanley upstairs. Once inside his bedroom, Caleb closed the door behind them and sighed in relief but noticed Stanley's sour mood. "Sorry, I forgot Mom was coming over. Please don't mind if she says anything odd." "That's not the point," Stanley snapped, voice cold. "She said you already have someone you like." Caleb blinked. "Yeah, so," Stanley's disbelief was clear. "You have someone you like, yet you're after me." Caleb chuckled, eyes glittering with amusement. "You're so adorable." Stanley blinked, confused. Caleb stepped closer, wrapping his arms gently around Stanley's waist, pulling him in. "Dummy, who do you think I like? I've been chasing and coaxing you for 2 months, and you still can't figure it out. How dumb can you be?" "Hey, don't call me dumb." Stanley pouted but his face immediately reddened. "Well, you never said it clearly, so I confused myself," he muttered shyly. Caleb chuckled, clearly enjoying Stanley's flustered expression. "It's okay, that's on me. I was waiting for the perfect time to tell you." "Oh, I see." Stanley's cheeks burned hotter. "That's good. Otherwise, I was ready to break things," he muttered. "That's fine. I've got plenty of stuff here, you can break all you want," Caleb said, excitedly. Stanley shook his head with disbelief. This doctor definitely liked him a little too much. Later that evening, Caleb found a quiet moment to tell his mother about Stanley, the same Stanley he'd been quietly chasing these past months. Stanley, a little hesitant about how his presence would be received, was surprised to see Caleb's mother warmly welcoming him. In fact, she seemed genuinely thrilled, almost overjoyed. Scooting closer on the couch, she reached out and took Stanley's hands gently in hers. Her eyes sparkled as she smiled softly. "I'm so happy, dear," she said warmly. "My rock-hearted son finally found someone he likes. Trust me, he keeps dozing off and mumbling about the one, though he never mentions a name, always saying he's waiting for permission." Stanley couldn't help but smile. The ice between them was melting as they found common ground, especially when they started talking about makeup. Stanley ended up giving her several makeup tips, which she eagerly noted down like it was the most important lesson of her life. Caleb sat back on the couch, watching the two people he cared for most share laughter and stories. Both were so talkative it made him chuckle quietly to himself. Later, they shared a cozy dinner together. When it was time to leave, Stanley insisted on going, worried about leaving Andy alone in the dorms. Both Caleb and his mother tried to persuade him to stay longer, but Stanley was firm. Caleb agreed and drove him back. Once they arrived, Stanley slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, glancing over at Caleb. "Your mother is really sweet. I like her," Stanley said softly. Caleb let out a small sigh. "Only her," he muttered, eyes fixed on the steering wheel. Before he could say more, he felt a sudden warmth as very soft lips pressed gently against his cheek. Caleb's eyes widened in surprise, his heart skipping a beat. Stanley whispered almost shyly, breath warm against his skin, "I might have started liking you a bit too." And just like that, Stanley practically jumped out of the car and dashed into the dorm. Caleb's eyes followed him, watching the retreating figure with a stunned smile and bright red ears. Leaning his forehead on the steering wheel, Caleb chuckled quietly to himself, feeling a flutter in his chest so strong it made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. He couldn't understand how such a small, sweet gesture could make him feel this alive, but it did. He felt like he could die happy right then and there. Stanley could hardly sleep that night, blushing and giggling quietly in the dark, much to Andy's dismay, who ended up wide awake, annoyed but secretly amused. The next day, both of them were surprised when a parcel arrived addressed to Stanley. They hadn't ordered anything recently, so curiosity instantly took over. Stanley carefully opened it, and his eyes went wide in shock. Inside was the most limited edition makeover box he'd been drooling over for months, the one he never had enough money to buy. His mind raced. Who could have sent this? Then it hit him. He grabbed his phone and dialed Caleb right away. "Hi, darling. Did you get your gift?" Caleb's calm, smooth voice greeted him. Stanley smirked. "Are you trying to be my sugar daddy now?" "Nope. Why would you think that? Just buying what my wife likes. Nothing wrong with that, right?" Stanley sighed. "Don't get ahead of yourself. When did I agree to be your wife?" Caleb chuckled. "You did, in my dreams. And well, in my dreams, we did more than just that." "Shut up," Stanley hissed, his face heating up. Caleb laughed softly. "Call me when you try out your gift, okay?" Stanley just hummed in response. Later that night, Stanley's call came at 3 a.m. Caleb, just finishing his shift, was half asleep in bed but smiled when he saw Stanley's name on the screen. "Darling, why are you up at 3 a.m.? Caleb asked, amused. 3 a.m. is the best time for makeover sessions. Didn't you say you wanted to see? That's why I called. If you don't want to, hang up now," Stanley said, opening the box with excitement. Layers of beautiful, expensive makeup products glimmered inside. Stanley gently swiped blush on his cheeks, eyes glued to the mirror. Caleb watched silently, lips twitching as he tried not to smile. "Let me try this makeup first. Then I'll dress up for our date tomorrow," Stanley said, carefully applying eyeliner. Caleb almost dropped his phone, eyes widening. "Huh, date, us, really, when?" Stanley panicked, shy and flustered. "You heard wrong. It's not a date, just a meetup." Caleb grinned knowingly. "Okay, just a meetup." Stanley tried to hide his shy smile and the deep blush coloring his cheeks, but Caleb could tell otherwise. The next day, Stanley's heart skipped a beat the moment he saw Caleb waiting downstairs by his flashy black car. A genuine smile spread across his face as he hurried over. "You came earlier than I expected," Stanley said, eyes sparkling. Caleb's gaze lingered on him, drinking in every detail of the man before him. His chest tightened as if Stanley was the only thing that mattered in the world. "You're not wearing a dress," Caleb noted softly, voice low with curiosity. Stanley grinned cheekily. "I thought I'd go on a date with the version of me you like the most." Caleb's smile softened. "You don't need to do that. No matter which version you are, I love both of them." Stanley's eyes brightened. "I know, but I wanted to date you as my real self too. So, am I not looking pretty enough?" He tugged his white shirt slightly, revealing a sliver of his waist with that tiny mole Caleb had been admiring. Caleb swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the exposed skin. "What? Jealous?" Stanley teased, eyebrows raised. "Nothing to be jealous of. It's all mine to admire and touch anyway." Caleb smirked, slipping his hand under Stanley's shirt. His fingers traced the mole lightly, sending shivers up Stanley's spine, though he wore a smile to hide it. "Shall we get going for our date? I'm on a mission to make you bankrupt today," Stanley said, playful and confident. Caleb matched his smirk with one of his own. "Oh, I'm excited to see if you can do it." He pulled Stanley closer, their noses nearly touching. Stanley chuckled, pushing him away gently. "Before that, start the car, doctor." He crossed his arms, feigning sternness. Caleb nodded, opening the door for him. Stanley slid into the plush seat as Caleb settled behind the wheel. Caleb fastened Stanley's seatbelt with care, his fingers lingering a moment longer than needed. Starting the engine, Caleb fought to keep his composure and focus on the road. But Stanley's smile stayed fixed on him. "You need to be more confident when you coax me, mister." "Give me your hand," Stanley said, reaching out to grab Caleb's free hand, placing it deliberately on his thigh. Caleb's eyes widened, heat rushing through him at the contact. Nervously, he wrapped his fingers around Stanley's thigh and gave a gentle caress. Stanley bit his lip, turning his gaze away to the window, cheeks tinged pink. "I'm hungry," Stanley muttered softly. "Then get anything you want," Caleb said, his grin broadening, clearly on cloud nine. Stanley laughed, the sound light and free. This date was already more exciting than he had imagined because he knew Caleb truly loved him, cherished every moment with him. It felt surreal just days ago. Stanley had no one to count on. Now, fate had gifted him this perfect Greek god-faced doctor, rich and kind, ready to worship him if necessary. And Stanley knew that deep down. 2 months later, Caleb had just finished checking up on one of his patients. Exhausted, he walked back into his office, mentally preparing for the next round of appointments. But the moment he opened the door, he froze, his breath catching in his throat. There, standing near the desk with a teasing grin, was the person he'd been dying to see. Someone once said having a doctor as a husband is tough. "You're too busy," Stanley joked, dressed in fitted blue jeans and a long-sleeved top that subtly revealed a glimpse of his waist. His black hair was neatly styled, his cheeks flushed pink, and his eyes sparkled as he smiled brightly at Caleb. Caleb didn't speak. He quietly closed the door behind him, then rushed forward, grabbing Stanley and kissing him deeply, desperately, as if he'd been drowning and finally found air. His hands slid beneath Stanley's shirt, wrapping tightly around his waist, his palms touching warm skin. As if his soul melted into the kiss, breathing in Stanley's familiar scent, feeling the tight ache in his chest loosen for the first time in days. Caleb, the ever-busy doctor who spent his days calming others and healing wounds, finally felt peace, because Stanley was here. Stanley, who always managed to soothe the chaos inside him. Stanley, who was his own personal remedy. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered, pulling him into a tighter hug, burying his face into Stanley's neck. The guilt weighed on him. He hadn't been able to call or even text the entire day before. The thought of Stanley waiting, feeling ignored, had eaten at him. Stanley smiled, gently stroking the back of Caleb's neck. "It's okay. I was just teasing, don't look so sad," he whispered, his voice soft and filled with affection. Honestly, Caleb was always attentive. Always quick to respond, quick to hold him, quick to say "I love you." Yesterday had been the first time he missed one of their calls during an operation. Just once, and Stanley had only teased him because he missed him. "Let me make it up to you," Caleb said suddenly, pulling away but not letting go of Stanley's wrist. "Let's go somewhere. Just us." Stanley laughed softly. Right now, and for the first time in a while, Caleb's heart felt light. "You know what, I'm not accepting your apology anymore," Stanley grumbled, throwing a pillow at Caleb's face as he lay dramatically sprawled on the bed, wrapped in nothing but a silk robe that barely clung to one shoulder. The morning sun poured in like a spotlight on his tragic performance, making his flushed cheeks and pouty lips look even more dramatic. Caleb, who was on his knees beside the bed, chuckled softly as he gently massaged cream onto Stanley's smooth thighs. "I said I'm sorry," he said in that annoyingly gentle doctor tone. "I didn't mean to break you last night. You were just too cute to stop. You tossed me around like a pizza dough, Caleb." Stanley snapped, but his tone cracked halfway into a whine. "I can't feel my hips. My ancestors felt that. You were literally moaning my name and asking for more," Caleb smirked, gliding his fingers a little too high on Stanley's thigh. "Because I thought you'd stop eventually. Not go for an encore at 3 a.m. Stanley slapped his shoulder with the back of his hand, still hiding the smile twitching at his lips as he kept remembering about yesterday. Yesterday had been perfect, date day. Eating everything under the sun, strolling hand in hand, sneaking kisses at every red light. And then, well, they barely made it past the front door before Caleb pounced like a man starved. Clothes were discarded like wrappers. Caleb had devoured him like a 5-course meal, as if apologizing for not being able to accept his calls. Caleb's way of apologizing was to spend the entire night worshipping every inch of him. Stanley tried not to remember the part where Caleb had whispered, "I swear, I won't miss your call ever again," between kisses on his thighs. Seeing his pouty lips, Caleb leaned in, brushing a kiss over those round swollen lips, nibbling on it before whispering, "Forgive me, darling. I'll be gentle tonight." Stanley blinked. "Tonight? You're planning to murder me again. I already booked a chiropractor for you. He owes me a favor." Caleb winked, then smoothly kissed him again before Stanley could protest. And as usual, Stanley kissed back, because let's face it, resisting Caleb when he was being all hot and remorsefully affectionate was impossible. Still breathless, Stanley shoved his tablet into Caleb's face. Okay, wait, look at this dress, isn't it pretty? Without even looking properly, Caleb swiped to buy it. Done. You want it in every color. He mumbled against Stanley's lips, already pulling the robe off his shoulder again. Stanley giggled, melting under Caleb's touch. You spoil me too much. I know, Caleb said, voice low. But I'll keep spoiling you till you forget how to walk. Too late for that, Doc. Stanley giggled, already melting as Caleb's hands wandered freely again. He didn't stop him. Why would he? This was heaven. Spending Caleb's money and being kissed senseless. Stanley couldn't help it. It wasn't his fault Caleb spoiled him rotten and he loved it. And Caleb would do anything, everything, to keep Stanley right where he belonged. Because now that their hearts were tied together, there was no escape. Not that either of them wanted one.